Hello, good evening, everyone here in the Spirit Society of Baltimore, but also those that are following us online. We are here again to resume the study of the book Times of Health and Conscientiousness. Isn't it, Kirsten? And we have been studying this book for quite a while, probably 2 years, Kirsten? I'm not sure how long, but it's always good after a couple months of break that Kirsten had because she had a baby, right? And she's here today. She's here to resume the chapters of this book. Kirsten is discussing this is part 2 of the book, and the chapter is chapter 12, if I'm not mistaken. Right, so passing the microphone to you, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you everyone for those who are watching on the web, for those who are there in person, or if you're watching the later already recorded and version of this video. Welcome, and we congratulate you for watching and continue to watch this series, or if this is the first video you've watched in this series, highly encourage you to go back to the previous videos we've made on this marvelous book entitled Times of Health and Conscientiousness. There are two large parts to this book, the first set of chapters and the second set, which we are on, and we are on part 2 and chapter 12, Conscientiousness and Habits. But before we begin today in diving into Joanna's words and reflections, we have a task for you to do. So whether you are watching this live, whether you are watching this later, I want you to take the time out. And if you can't do it right now, do it later, but make a few mental notes on what you would like or wish for in a spouse or a partner, or would you wish your spouse or partner, which habits that they had, and what kind of person you would want. Make a list. Take a second. I'll repeat that. Again, feel free to do that now. You can write it down on a piece of paper, on your cell phone, wherever is handy that you can do, or just take a mental note of it. What are the things that you look for in a spouse, partner, and what would be the habits that you would want them to have? We'll leave it at that for right now. Think about that, keep that on the back burner, and keep that list handy because we're going to revisit it at the end. It'll all make sense. It'll all come full circle, I promise, once we get into all of this. So, conscientiousness and habits. Joanna does not disappoint in this chapter. She never disappoints in this book. It's fascinating, it is intriguing, it is uplifting, and as always, Joanna really, really goes beneath the surface. Now, this talk is not meant to encompass every single last detail of this chapter because it's rich and it warrants much more than an hour-length talk or 45-minute talk. It really requires a great deal of study sitting down. So we always like to think that these talks, these conversations, are more of a teaser to hopefully get you excited or interested to read more of Joanna's work, more about Spiritism, and lastly, and probably, dare I say more importantly, to learn more about ourselves and enriching our minds. So, this chapter 12, is on habits. Most of us are familiar with what a habit is. You can say, at least from a psychological standpoint, that a habit is any regularly repeated behavior that requires little or no thought and is learned. And we can also say that habits form through repetition and reinforcement, and reinforcement encourages the repetition of a behavior. And you can think of it as when we are teaching our children, or if you're a teacher of children, you'll notice that children tend to learn through repetition, and we are the same as adults, and that's how we get kids to learn. That's how we get adults to learn ultimately as well. So habits, and they're behaviors that we have formed that we don't even think about anymore because, ergo, they've become a habit. So Joanna starts out this chapter beautifully in such a profound way as she tips her hat respectfully at a perhaps well-known Spanish priest from the 1500s named Saint John of the Cross. And she quotes him, and she says, Saint John of the Cross stated that God is found in the darkness of the human being. I'm going to let that simmer for a second. Saint John of the Cross stated that God is found in the darkness of the human being. God is found in the darkness of the human being. Now, this quote reflects on so much of Saint John of the Cross's experience in life and how he experienced God, but it also speaks to someone who has the experience of really living a deep and profound and reflective life. Let's read on. She goes on to say, the innate, profound self of individuals, yet undetected reality, lies in their dark side. And when Joanna refers to the dark side, no, it is not. When we think of the dark side, we tend to have that phrase or that word connected to or equated to all things that are bad. And that's not necessarily what they're talking about here. Often in psychology, they refer to the shadow or the shadows or the shadow part of me, depending upon who you talk to. But that aspect of ourselves, that dark part of ourselves, is that unknown, often scary, but it's meant to symbolize that deep part within ourselves. And yes, sometimes accessing that shadow or the shadow lies within it parts of us that our mind, our consciousness has pushed way down, has either suppressed it or just chosen for a time to lock it away. And sometimes those things aren't good, in a sense. In the sense that we don't want to remember them, in a sense that we don't want to recall them. Perhaps they were things in this life or in a previous life that we did or had happened to us. But what is interesting is how we know that St. John of the Cross, when he states that God is found in that darkness, because we know that God is within us. And Joanna goes on to talk about, let me go back further in this chapter, how in the roots of who we are connected to God. We are divine. So when we go down into the depths of who we are, those places that we don't want to deal with, that we have pushed down, forgotten about, are scary. What we learn when we find God, because we often are scared of our shadow parts, that we learn when we face our fear. It's not as scary as what we thought it would be. We find courage, we find hope, and we find God. So when we read this, we know truly that St. John of the Cross was one of those human beings that was able to reach that depth of his soul. Because only truly someone that has experienced that, gone into the darkness and found God, can come out and say that they have. Joanna goes on to say, as long as this area of shadows has not been lit by reason, ignorance prevails and the instincts rule, even if reasoning seems to control their habits and actions. Let's break that down real quick, because that's a lot, and it's really important. So, as human beings, we have those parts of ourselves in our deep unconscious or our deep consciousness that's lays beneath this shadow, okay? When we don't bring light to those areas, those are the things that tend to drive us. So let's give an example of this, okay? You can know someone that's very rational thinking person, that's very reasonable, that, doesn't just live on the edge, doesn't just wear their heart on their sleeve. This is a person you could think of, you probably know one, that you could say, oh, he's a level-headed person. He or she is a level-headed person. But that person, even that person, can be driven by their unconscious desires, thoughts, issues, fears. So until we bring light to that, until we go within the depths of our soul, our mind, and shed light on that, mean that self-discovery, and come to terms and meet ourselves, we are going to allow ignorance to prevail. So when I'm scared to look in the box, I keep it locked. That fear and that ignorance will only ooze out of that, in a sense, and cloud our mind. But the moment I open that box within me, that shadow box, let's use it as an analogy, all of that dissipates and we become more self-aware. We become less fearful and more intentional in our lives. And this is what explains when we see people who are very logical, very level-headed, doing or becoming other people. Like, oh, I cannot believe this person did this. They seem so level-headed. Well, from what we know of them, but we are much more than surface level people. We are much more. So as we were studying this, we thought of sort of a more tangible example, if you will. And I'll say this briefly because we have to also move on. Imagine grass. When you look at grass, you have the different layers. You have the grass, you have the topsoil, you have all the different layers of the grass, okay? And if I were to take a flashlight and put it on top of the grass and turn the flashlight on, and if I were to have a sliced view of that, you would see that maybe very, very few light particles would be able to pass through that dirt beyond that top layer. But we take another section of that same grass, do the same thing, except I dig a deep hole straight down. And again, I perform the same thing. I take the flashlight and I turn it on. Except the light now and all the light particles are able to shine and go down further. You could see deeper into what looks like an abyss, perhaps, depending on how deep you dig it. But the point is that the shadow, and when we don't go deeper into who we are, when we don't reflect on ourselves, we don't spend time in reflection, when we don't take the time to form new healthy habits, new ways of thinking, and more positive ways of thinking, and facing who we are, reflecting on who I am, I will continuously just be like the light on top of the grass, with only a little bit of light to go through. I need to dig up and out, or open up to see what lies beneath and not be afraid. So we digress back to what Joanna says here. She continues on to say, Effort must be continuously exerted in every period of earthly existence, because experiences are what raise individuals to more significant levels, offering more ample opportunities for self-knowledge. So let us not be afraid of having experiences. Now, this is not to say we should go and just allow ourselves to live a hedonistic lifestyle because they want to have all kinds of experiences. That's not what Joanna's saying here. She's saying, as you're trying to live your life in the best way possible, we are going to encounter hardships. We're going to encounter things that are difficult. But let's not shy away and run away from those experiences. We must use those experiences to exert effort, because it's through experiences with interactions with others that might be challenging. Our coworkers, people at the grocery store, when you go to the post office, and especially within our own families. Those are opportunities for us to grow, for us to gain self-knowledge. And here's where Joanna reminds us, the roots of the individual are divine. I am, my roots, I am divine, making the body an instrument or fertile soil for the unfolding of latent treasures. How beautiful is that? Look how great. As my late mother-in-law would say often when I would speak with her, and I'm going to translate to English because obviously she didn't speak English, but she used to say a common phrase, look how great God is. Look how great God is. Often inserting that phrase in sentences where hardships were discussed, but always having this frame of mind, looking at things from a more positive perspective. But now we understand that it's because of that divine within us that we can connect every experience with an experience connected to the divine, if we so choose to view it that way. Look how great God is. We've had these opportunities of personal growth. Look how great God is, giving us this opportunity to work and strengthen my faith. Look how great God is. He makes us divine. I am divine. You are divine. So our bodies are instruments, undoubtedly, of latent treasures. How beautiful is that? We have latent treasures within us. But Joanna continues, of course, we cannot deny, she reminds us, we can't deny the endogenous and exogenous factors. She says endogenous factors such as heredity, the endocrine system, and others weigh on individuals' shoulders on the long human journey, as do exogenous factors such as the contributions of education, society, and or the economy as generators of habit. So Joanna acknowledges the obvious. There are internal and external factors that affect us, of course. The time we live in, the society we live in, the culture we live in, the health, our heredity, all these things play a part. They play a part. They don't define who we are, but they play a part. But she again reminds us, but we, the immortal spirit that we are heir to our own achievements, which transfers from one existence to the next, acquisitions that advance it, retain it, or trap it in perturbing states. So we are our own heirs. We carry with us from one existence to the next, and those things can help us, hurt us, or trap us. So yes, there are factors outside of us and even inside of us. But ultimately, we are the ones that make those decisions on how to respond to those things. And a common example of this, and we've had many discussions within our day-to-day lives with folks, and obviously having children as well, and having to acknowledge that, for instance, growing up as a woman, as a female, having endogenous factors such as hormones, you can have your premenstrual symptoms, and you have your cycle, and that also can affect hormones and your mood, and so it makes the female body intricately very different from what might, in comparison to a male, someone growing up in a male body that has different types of hormones, and all those things can affect that particular spirit. Yes, absolutely. Well, we cannot lay fault completely to the physical body, because obviously we, the immortal spirit that we are, plays a huge part in the effects of our body as well. It's just Joanna shares all that to say that ultimately it is a decision into what kind of habits that we form. We cannot blame endogenous or exogenous factors for who we are and the habits we have created. We cannot place blame and say, well, it's society's fault. It plays a role. It does. But that's why deep reflection is so imperative, so vital for our everyday health, for our everyday well-being. Because as Joanna teaches us in her rather smaller book of messages called Happy Life, and she says that trends and things that are popular, they come and go. They come and go from one generation to the next, from one era to the next. And what always should stay, but is not, but what should stay in fashion is morality. That does not change. Morality from one era to the next does not change. It does not go out of style, as some would want us to believe. So it's just something for us to think further on. But she continues in talking about habit. Now, we've discussed this before, and you can go to my slides now. We've discussed this before, and we brought up this pretty famous research done by Stanford, I believe it was, the marshmallow study. And I'll bring a picture here in a second of it. And it basically was a study of children and which children delayed instant gratification. And they followed those particular children as they grew up, and they followed them into adulthood, and they were able to see who was successful, quote unquote, and who was not. Successful in the sense that who were mature, well-adjusted, quote unquote, happy individuals in their lives, and who weren't, who ended up going into jail, or who dropped out of school, or who weren't able to keep a job, got involved in drugs, what have you. So they found that children, when they had the ability to delay instant gratification, were more successful and happy later in life. So we know this ability to delay instant gratification it's an important habit. And Joanna talks a little bit about that in this chapter. She says, given the habit of instant satisfaction, down through time, a fissure, a cut, has opened, or a division has opened up between the superficial, remember that top layer of grass, and the deep consciousness, developing the areas of the personality at the expense of the areas of the individuality. This separation has caused individuals to be disinterested in transcendental achievements which seem too difficult or discouraging, such as the preoccupation with the physical aspects of life. There's this new trend, and we saw this on social media. There's a new trend of young adults who are growing up into or reaching adulthood, or who are in young adulthood, who do not wish to work. I think there's even a term for them. I can't recall it offhand, but it's become quite a trend. It's being talked about on social media, where it's kids who've grown up who do not wish to have a career. They do not wish to, because it's too hard, it's too difficult. Everything's discouraging. They just want to focus on themselves and just live their life superficially, so it would seem. So when we read and study this really, we can see how this is very visible in our modern day society. That there has, due to these particular children's upbringings, and it's important to note that these particular individuals are individuals, and take this with a grain of salt, because this is anecdotal. This is not actual research. This is purely anecdotal data that I'm sharing with you. But we see it a lot. You see it enough, a good number of examples of it anyhow, where these are young adults and individuals that are living in their parents' home, who fund all of their activities. So usually these are kids either recently turned 18, that are either tried to go to college and no longer want to go to college, but essentially they are being taken care of by their guardians. We see this as this new trend. And I'm just going to leave that data right there for you. You can come to your own conclusions of what that means, because it's not just the fault of those particular children who have now become adults that they are in that position, but as Joanna says, we are still responsible for our own decisions, albeit, again, there are external factors that can affect who we become: our parents, our upbringing, society. But I digress, not wanting to go too far off a tangent here. It's important when Joanna mentions the habit of instant satisfaction or instant gratification. In another discussions, you might also have the same meaning attached to it. Because of that desire to be gratified right there in the moment, we have created this abyss between our deep consciousness and our superficial. So we have different layers to our consciousness, right? We've talked about this before, and you also can Google this in terms of psychology and the different layers if you want to go deeper. But we have different layers. And so Joanna reminds us that those connections have to be made, and we are severing them, or at least creating a huge barrier, when we live in a cycle of instant gratification. When we teach our children instant gratification, there have been studies that have come out, and this was talked about. Our pediatrician a couple of years ago had mentioned the study to us. There was a study that came out with parents that gave their children an electronic device every time they cried, just to kind of like quiet them down. So, when you're out and about with your kids and they're screaming, they're hollering, and the usual habit is, let me give them my phone, an iPad, something generally electronic, because most of humanity has electronic devices. Whereas in olden times, your mother would simply give you the look, and you knew you better hush, or you would really get into some trouble when you get home. But nowadays, in our society, at least here in North America, where, I would say the average American has some form of a tablet or smart device. So I digress. So this research showed that these children, that it was the most unhealthy thing to do for your children because it caused them, fell into this loop of instant gratification. So these children are growing up not knowing how to self-regulate. Because in that moment of struggle, of throwing a tantrum, of not wanting to deal with the situation, and we're talking about little kids here. So oftentimes we think, oh, it's just in the moment, it's not a big deal, it's just this one time, which the one time turns into 10 to 20 to 30 to a million times, right? Because, we are on this fast track of just trying to get things done, as parents, and we have our to-do list and we have our things to do. And sometimes our children become more of a nuisance to us, not intentionally, but unintentionally. And so we want to, quiet them. So we give them a device. So that makes these children unable as they grow up to self-regulate their emotions. So what they're really pushing for now, which makes complete sense, is to not do that, is to allow our children. And if you're an adult and have trouble with self-regulating, you can still work on this, but allow the child as well, to experience frustration. Hold that for a second. Think about that for a second. It's important for us to allow our children and ourselves to experience frustration if we haven't been taught otherwise. Allow your children to experience frustration, to get upset. We don't have to rush to put a Band-Aid or okay it to death, or to try to make it okay. Instead, allow them to be frustrated. Allow them to self-regulate, because they will eventually. Now, whether that's taking a moments longer to deal with your child when they're throwing a tantrum, it's difficult. Nobody said it's easy. It's not. It's darn right hard to live life. It's challenging. It's worth it when we live intentionally. It has so many benefits. We are investing in our children who are meant to live in society, and so we can help them to be better individuals within society, but also for ourselves. To delay instant gratification in our everyday lives. Begin to do this. When you want something that's not healthy for you, try to delay that instant gratification of doing that. Because the rule is, if we can delay that, we have greater benefits at a later time. But we digress. Going back to our slides. Instant gratification in today's day and age, I'd say since the 2000s, with the rise of social media, we already know this. The research has been done. We know how social media is. It's all about instant gratification. Anyone that does any type of marketing or works on social media knows that the key to engagement is that instant gratification for your viewers. So that's why social media platforms such as TikTok are one of the most widely used, because it's short, quick, instant gratification videos. And don't get us wrong, there are a lot of positive, uplifting things, but there are a lot that is not. But it's that instant gratification. It's that 30 seconds. It's that 1 minute. We just want it quick and want to move on to the next. So it's that mental habit that we've formed. That's why we can see sometimes we get into the habit of being on such types of platforms that in our real life, at work, in our relationships, it might be hard for us to sit down and complete and follow through a long task that you're not going to feel instantly great. You're not going to feel instant gratification for. That's why in today's society, we see the younger generation not staying at jobs, in part for so long. Perhaps in theory, it could be related to this. They want that instant gratification, even at work. They're not getting it, so they move on. But it seems as though gone are the days where we stay at jobs for 10, 20, 30 years. Now, there are exceptions to everything, and every individual experience is very different. So, not taking away from legitimate experience and things that happen, and also not saying that if you stay at a job for 3 years that you're a bad person. Not at all. Not at all. Sometimes life takes us in different directions. We grow, and growing is healthy. And only through self-reflection will I, as an individual, will you, as an individual, know where you stand. So social media has this effect on instant gratification. And again, we talked about the marshmallow test and the famous study that was done at Stanford University. You can Google it, you can look it up. There's videos on it, and it's so widely known. And different variations of this research has been done and has been proven, and there have been different ways it's been approached. And again, still it tells us the same thing. So Joanna goes on to explain, and this is important. This is why Joanna tells us that self-reflection and taking the time to really think. And there's a part in the book where she says the mind, I have the book right in front of me, the mind's function is to think. I digress. She says the use of reason provides discernment, which fosters choosing healthy habits conducive to happiness, emulators of evolution. Laziness regarding thinking is responsible for limiting one's discernment, one's reason, conforming to narrow and superficial analysis of life and its manifestations. Individuals remain at a lower stage, squandering time and opportunities. I'm going to read that again. Laziness regarding thinking. Laziness regarding thinking is responsible for limiting one's discernment, one's reason. Let that marinate for a second. Laziness regarding one's thinking. That might look like, oh, I don't even want to think about that. You might say to yourself, I don't want to think about that. I don't want to deal with it. Whatever. I don't want to think about it. That type of thinking limits our discernment. What is discernment? Our ability to identify if something is good or not. And we use good loosely because there's always that sometimes negative taste in our mouth about the word good. But let's take this conversation. Things that are good for us, that are healthy, are potential paths, decisions that are good for us, and decisions that might be really bad for us. When I am lazy in my thinking, I don't want to think about that. That leads to lack of discernment, which leads to bad decisions. Which leads to, as Joanna says here, superficial analysis of life and its manifestations. So when you think of someone that's superficial, and oftentimes we might not want to think of ourselves that way. In the Spirit's book, they say that we often attribute more virtues to ourselves than what really exist. The Spirit's book says that we often attribute more virtues to ourselves than what really exist. Now, that's not to say that we should be down on ourselves, that we should hate ourselves, that we should look at ourselves as bad. No, Joanna goes on and on about talking about self-love, self-compassion. So much of the work that she talks in Spiritism is about self-love, accepting yourself. It's not about denigrating, putting yourself down. It's not about that. It's just about facing our shadows, facing who we are. And guess what? If we identify ourselves as having some habits that are superficial, so be it. Okay, how do we become better? How do I become better? Let's not be afraid to face that. So what if we are? Okay, let's do better. Let's just do better. Let's work on those parts. And that's the scary part. That's where ignorance lies. When we don't want to acknowledge or even look at who we are. Because we can't fathom ever accepting the thought that we could ever be superficial in any way. So thus I'll live in ignorance. And I'll live at that lower stage, wasting my time, wasting this precious life. I was listening to a talk by Givaldi just the other day, and he was just talking about this, about how life is precious, life is beautiful. Live it to our fullest. Be happy that we're living. Take every opportunity to live it to our fullest and greatest potential. And he says this as he is 90-some years old, after he had a consultation with one of his doctors that was telling him, how old his body is, essentially. How this is wrong and that is wrong and this is not working well, and for a 90-some-year-old. And he said, he turned to his doctor and said, "Doc, I'm happy. I still have life in me. That I can live it, that I can spread joy, that I can share the love of Jesus, share the love of Spiritism, share how life is beautiful with others. I have life in me." And he reminds us, like Joanna does, let's take every opportunity to grow. So, I digress. Back to our slide. Joanna says, if you choose mental habits of discernment for what is correct, you will act with confidence. And those memories will function automatically, maturing you intellectually and emotionally. And this behavior will give you self-awareness, oneness with your deep self. If you choose mental habits of discernment for what is correct, you will act with confidence, and those memories will function automatically, maturing you intellectually and emotionally. This behavior will give you self-awareness, oneness with your deep self. If we choose to reflect and not live in superficiality, you will become more confident in yourself. You will trust yourself more because your deep self will know that you're capable and living your best version of yourself, and will become automatic in this process of maturation of self. And you will continuously become more self-aware because you are living life intentionally, contemplating about which decision, reflecting about daily decisions, the friends that I hang around with, what I talk about, what I listen to on a daily basis, the conversations that I'm having, the smallest of decisions that I'm making, all these things. When I spend time contemplating, is this the best route for me to go? Should I be thinking like this? In which way should I be thinking? Should I forgive this person? Or we can live on automatic and sort of autopilot and live superficially, because that doesn't take any effort. It takes no work. It takes little to no work. But when we begin to replace and work, we begin to work on ourselves. And Kardec, it's either in the Gospel according to Spiritism or that's in the Spirits book. It says, and it's in a footnote, or Kardec says that, or the spirits say that the more we work on ourselves and work to strengthen our virtue, I think it's the spirits say this, the more we work on our positive virtues, our vices don't speak as loud. The more I continue to replace negative thoughts with positive ones, that's what speaks the loudest. So it's a continuous sort of re-education for ourselves, for our own minds, for our hearts, for our habits. Creating these new habits, creating new ways of being, creating new pathways. We wouldn't say counteract, but they simply, in so many words, make us stronger in that area. Because we are connecting with that deeper self, as Joanna says. Continuing on and finalizing, she says, the kingdom of heaven, she's quoting Jesus here, the kingdom of heaven is within you. Look how amazing God is. The kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is within me. I want you just to repeat that to yourself in your mind. The kingdom of heaven is within me. Should be a mantra. The kingdom of heaven is within you, emphasized Jesus with infinite wisdom and with an extraordinary relevance of content during an age of great ignorance. Depth psychology today reveals that dark side of individuals, illuminating them with the presence of the spirit in the body, such as the contribution proposed by Viktor Frankl in his noetic approach, a word derived from Greek word noes, or spirit. The kingdom of heaven is within us. We are divine. And it's important to remember that. And it's not by chance that Joanna puts that right there before she states about how depth psychology, or psychology that looks to the depths of who we are. When we begin to learn parts of ourselves that doesn't seem divine at all. But it's meant to remind us that we are immortal spirits, that there are so many connections we can make to our divine conscientiousness, our connections with God, spirit, if you will. And if you wish, you can read about Viktor Frankl. Some might know who he is, some might not. He is the famous physician, psychiatrist, neurologist, and he spent, when he was about in his late 30s, was when he spent time in the concentration camps and ended up having that opportunity, albeit horrific, to really grow deeply. And he wrote books, and you can go and Google this Austrian philosopher, psychologist, Holocaust survivor, and his amazing soul searching that he did during his experience with the Holocaust, and ultimately reminding us, and he became famous with the work of logotherapy. And we won't go too much into it because we're here at the end already. But basically, logotherapy was built on this idea of freedom of will to meaning, and meaning of life. All that to say is that we can connect with the divine within us as we create new habits. we can find that strength to create new habits. And this is when Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you, is from Luke chapter 17, verses 21. And in ending and finalizing our thoughts here today, in the Spirit's book, question 779, they asked, do humans draw from within themselves the power to progress, or is progress nothing more than the results of education? So do we possess the power to progress, or is progress nothing more than just through education? The Spirit's answer, they, humans, advance naturally by themselves, not all progress at the same time or in the same manner. However, it is through social contact that the most advance help the others to progress. Because it's interesting for us to note, again, the endogenous, especially the exogenous factors. Living in society, there are external factors, culture, the influences from the outside world, and in modern day that also includes social media. But it still includes those we hang around with, those we have to work with, those that we just deal with on a daily basis for one reason or another. So we affect one another. So the habits that I have affect those around us. So forming new habits requires us to go within ourselves, to acknowledge that perhaps the habits that I have are not that beneficial, and noting that it's going to take work on our behalf. But Joanna reminds us that it's work worth doing, and work that we can find God as we do that work. As she starts out in this beautiful chapter, reminding us that St. John of the Cross, that God is found in the darkness of the human being. God is found within us, in the depths of our souls, in the depths of all of our darkness, the good, the bad, the ugly. We can find God there. And fear, more than anything else, holds us back. Fear is what keeps us from taking that step forward in ourselves to face who we are, but to also have the courage, as Joanna reminds us, to remind ourselves that we are divine, that I am a child of God, and that I am worthy of joy and happiness. So remember, at the beginning of this conversation, this talk, we asked you to write down, hopefully on a piece of paper, what I look for in a spouse, or what I look for in a partner, or what I wish my partner, husband, wife had, and what habits they had. Right? We asked you to make that list. So now, if you've made that list, at the top of the list where you have written what I want in a partner, spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, I want you to cross out that last part. And instead, it's going to read what I want for myself. All those things that you want in someone else, form those habits. Become that uplifting, and we only assume that all the traits and qualities and habits are positive and uplifting and good. Become those things. Work on those habits, because ultimately to become those uplifting, to become those things on your list, require habit changes. So, dear friends, just some homework for you to do, working on yourself, form new habits, and have courage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kirsten. A lot of information, food for thoughts. Thank you for the lights. And I guess we have a lot of questions, right? But we have a time to go through here. We have some question online, but before we go online, I would like to open for us here to make any comment, any question for Kirsten, because this topic of change habit and conscientiousness is something that is very up to date, right? And drives our lives. Good habit bring good result. Bad ones not so good, right? So any question, comment from this beautiful audience that we have here? Don't be shy, okay? Comment, question, Johnny?
For those of you who are not in the habit of asking questions, I challenge you to make a comment.
Yes. Anyone here? If not, guess we have a couple of. Let me see here. We have we have Alba. I'm gonna put Alba question here, kissing. I cannot read here because it's too small for me. But let me see what's Alba talking about laziness regarding thinking. Did you want to mention about the habit of counterbalance this situation? What would be the good thinking habit?
Great. I think you need to mute your. I'm hearing feedback, Daniel.
Okay, sorry about that.
Great question. I could tell that you're doing some deep reflecting there, Alba, and that's excellent. That's always, it's always a good thing. It's a good habit to have, this reflection. So, although it's not blatantly necessarily stated by Joanna in this chapter, there are in other books, as she recommends, counterbalancing, if you will, this laziness. Did Joanna mention about the habits of counterbalance situation? Sorry, just rereading the question real quick. Yeah, what would be the counterbalancing of lazy thinking? To think. But to answer the question directly, no, she doesn't give specific. I think it's hinted at, it's inferred in many of parts of this chapter, because she, in the way she's trying to educate us, when she says the habit of thinking expands the potential to discern. So thinking, reflecting more would be the new types of habits to build. So in order for us to know which habits we should change or what we need to work on, we have to first self-reflect, right? To know what it is about ourselves, to do that self-reflection. And sometimes it's something as easy as starting to keep a journal or write down on a notepad your daily thoughts at the end of the day. What are some things that you can work on, or even better yet, goals that you wish to reach. I want to be a better listener. Identifying the things, again, when we mentioned about creating the list of what would your ideal partner look like, and writing that list, and then scratching out at the top your ideal partner and put your name down and work towards those things. So, and good thinking habits are anything that uplifts us, connects us to all that is good. So I think that can encompass a lot. And so hope that helps a little bit. Oh, I can't hear you, Daniel.
To mute myself because I know you have some feedback in your end, right? But before I make my comments, let us go. Anyone here like to comment to ask question? Yes, Johnny.
Hi, Kirsten. Thank you for your talk. It was very, very nice. I strongly recommend, this chapter to everybody. And something, because I already read this book some years ago, and I always go back to it. And I think when Alba says what would be the way, I think to have a friend that you can always exchange this kind of conversation. You know what I mean? Like you can maintain, sometimes it's your mother, sometimes it's your family member, your spouse, your best friend, somebody, even your daughter. I think talk. And can you hear me well, Kirsten? You can hear me? Okay. So I think this exchange of with particular people, some people don't like to talk about anything. But I think when you have a friend or a family member that likes to, this is what happened, and I concluded this, and I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to do that because I think this route doesn't work. I think that can be very healthy, because sometimes people say, go to your psychologist, go to your counselor, go to, like a professional. But it's so like, okay, it's 45 minutes, it's gone, bye, and you lost the whole conversation because you wanted to finish, but you couldn't because time has arrived. It's time to leave. And I think that can be sometimes so complicated. But if you have a friend and you exchange good vibes, you know what I mean? And you are always positive and you are always productive on your self-assessment, like you don't have even to, so it's a conversation with yourself because God is within, and also with a good friend, you know who you can talk to. And the person is going to say, yeah, I told you that thing wouldn't work. And you listen, you don't think the person is against you. I think that is, I think, a treasure. And this chapter is all about this, in my opinion. So thank you so much for bringing this up, because it's very useful. Thank you.
I think you bring up a really good point, Dione, and I just kind of wanted to comment on your comment that, I mean, ultimately it goes back to us, as much as we can have, and it's important. Let's not, be mistaken about the importance of having good, positive, uplifting friends around us. But ultimately, it's also how we choose to reflect on those positive things and ways in which they're trying to help us. And I can't help but reflect and think about my own faults and where I fail in this regard, and lazy thinking. And having been married now for a little over a decade, and being the person that I'm married to, I think because educationally he was educated to be a researcher, so he still kind of has that mind to always be very reflective, and thinks a lot. Not that, and I'm forgive the personal anecdote. I'm going to share this to prove a point here, not because I want to talk about myself at all. But I'll notice that, in our day-to-day lives, and needing to make a certain decision, whereas I might be quick in certain regards to want to make a decision on something, he might be more reflective and wanting to really think through things. And for a very long time, that annoyed the living, that annoyed me, to say the least. It annoyed me, but I've learned to be more reflective as well, and to take that as an opportunity to think more. And Joanna reminds us in this chapter, to not only think, with that immediate, with that instant gratification, to be more reflective, to be more intentional. And again, like Gioni was sharing, when we're in different experiences, we have that opportunity where we can fall back into old habits, or perhaps look at something in a different way. Let us be open to that, to perhaps do things in a different way, because it could mean it's a better way. It could be better just because we're not used to it. So I digress. I throw it back over to you, Daniel.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. So let us go through a couple of comments, and there is a question here as well in the chat. Alba says, fear is the antithesis of love. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. And then we have I guess, a question from A. Array, I think. I hope I pronounce, yes, how are you? Your name. So, I don't know if a female or male, but she or he says, I'm find it hard to get my young adult kids to look into this information. Don't want to let go of the instant gratification. Once they were old enough, they brought their own phone. They bought their own phones. Not how I did. Um, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that. I think she's sharing um, her experience with her kids, right?
Yeah,
And
thanks, Daniel. I
go
can
ahead.
comment on this. And I think the pronunciation is Arroyo of the last name. So I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's Arroyo. I'm finding it hard to get my young adult kids to look into this information. Don't want to let go of that instant gratification. Once they were old enough, they brought their own phones. Not how I did things, for sure, for sure. And this is the plight of every parent, right? We try our best, we do our best to raise our children the best way we can, and that's all we can do. And being able to let go of that is really imperative, to say, I've done my best. I'll continue to encourage them to do otherwise, but also be that change. Even as having children that are getting older, having adult children, there obviously reaches the point where we don't have that same ability to try to rear them as we did when maybe they were like 10 or 12 or 6 or what have you. But obviously parenting looks very different when our children are older, and it's more about just trying to support them as best we can and just making whatever interactions that you have with them to be positive and to, again, to be that example. So being mindful, if you do have a phone that's a smart device, to not be on it when you're around them, and to gently encourage them to be present when they are with you. If they're not at the age where, you have that ability to kind of enforce that rule anymore, you can just gently ask, because now you're at a point where they're able to reason and to say, hey, I would love to have a sit down, spend this time at dinner or this time we're out together, to be with less cell phones and more being present. And sometimes just reasoning sometimes can help. And again, at times, we have to respect that they have the right to choose differently. That they have the right to, even though we may raise them in one way, that they may choose to be otherwise. And that's
Thank you.
part of parenting.
Before we go to the final comments here, anyone here would like to make comment or question? We approach the end of our service tonight. Very quickly, Sarah said, great talk. Iracema said, thank you very much, Kirsten, for this spectacular talk. Always trying to change our bad habits for the better. So one of the things that, now is me, Kirsten, one of the things that caught my attention in your presentation was the word self-regulation, regulation, right, that you mentioned, that has to do with self-gratification, that sometimes let someone go to a process of frustration could be good, right? So of course, everything has as you said, has a regulation, how much we need to let that child or that person go to that period of frustration can impact for positive or negative, right, in the long run. And in life, if you look in nature, if you look the creation, everything demands works, right? Nothing happened just like, if you just decide to do nothing. We need to work, right? Our bodies, nature itself, go through a process of work, but also is important to modulate how much we do, because depends how much we do something, the consequence could be good or bad. If we're doing something that is not good, the consequence is going to be a disastrous, right? Very disastrous consequence. But at the end of the day, it's up to us. Our actions, our habits will determine for how long we need to go to that process of to reach a better place in our evolution. So I guess you, Joanna de Angelis, brought a great reminder in this chapter about habits, because we all have, right? The only thing that I kind of like I will ask myself as you were presenting is if Joanna mentioned anything about how long it may take for one to change a habit that's not healthy. Does she make any comment related to this, Kirsten?
She does not actually. She doesn't talk about or focus on how long it takes. Um, just that we need to, for our own spiritual evolution, to create better habits, but more so reflecting on how superficial we can become when we don't spend the time in reflection in order for our consciousness to connect with our deeper consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, sorry. You can finish.
So she talks about that, and I think there's something to be said about that, because we can talk about, okay, I have XYZ habits, let me work on those. Joanna is very intentional with everything that she writes, everything that she puts out. And I think she does this on purpose. And I think it's something for us to, again, reflect on, that it's not about fixing 10 habits, but it's about creating the new habit of how we approach our thinking, our everyday lives, which is essentially, by definition, our habits. To spend more time, to be more intentional and thoughtful and reflecting on what we're doing, asking ourselves, why am I doing this? And facing who we are, and not being afraid, but also facing it courageously. And I mean, I could go on and on about this, but I think she doesn't mix words, because she knows that once we begin to face the shadows, that's why I believe she starts out the chapter quoting St. John of the Cross, that we find God in our shadows, because it's an encouragement, but it's also a reminder that when we go deeper, it can be scary, but we can still find God there. We can still find courage and joy and all those good things. So I know I probably didn't answer your question directly, but I don't know.
No, that's fine. Yeah, and I guess even if we have, okay, so even if we have like a certain like amount of time to change a habit, that's would be case by case, because we are different spirit, different people that has different time. I know that we have a feedback over there, right? But and for immortal spirits, you know, we are immortal, so we have no end. We have a time of creation, but we have no end, right? So it's up to each one of us to decide if the change our habit will be in a lifetime, or we're gonna wait 10 reincarnation or not, right? So Kirsten, I guess we reach our time here. Thank you so much. We would like to know if you would like to do a prayer so we can finalize our live stream and continue with our service here at the SSB. Kirsten, would you like to do a final prayer?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Dear Heavenly Father, we give thanks to you, to our divine mentors, spirit benefactors, our spirit friends, workers of love and light, those that are incarnate as well. We thank all of you for witnessing and being present, listening to Joanna's words, having the courage to face life and to live it happily. And we pray, dear God, not just for ourselves, we pray for one another. We pray for our community. We pray for those in the spirit realm, those that are suffering, that are connected to us. We pray for those across cities and our countries, for those who suffer in darkness. We pray that the hearts and minds of our leaders may be guided to connect with their spirit guides and their divine purpose. We pray for those of us who are trying to be on the right path, those in religious arenas, circles, churches, spiritist centers, and the like, to continue on courageously, loving, being connected to God, and sharing out that light and that love with others, bringing hope in the darkness. May we take these reminders from Joanna today to find God in our darkness, to reflect deeper in our lives about who we are and what we're doing, always holding Jesus close to our hearts. We thank you, and so be it.
We thank everyone. Hope everyone has a good rest of the day.